Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we are finishing up, yes, we are finishing up the notes for period 4. And if you remember period 4 is 1800 to 1844. Or is it 1848? I can't remember. It's somewhere around there. Let me share my screen. Let's not open up the window first. Ta-da! Voila! Yeah, 1800, 1848. I always forget. I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning of the class, but the periods, we already saw some with period 2. No, we didn't. Kind of with from period 2 to period 3. But period 4, 5, 6, they all, there's some overlap and there's clear distinctions between this overlap, okay? And so chapter 12, the last chapter, is antebellum culture and reform. Antebellum is the term used to describe before the war. If you know your Latin, ante means before. All right, so let's start. So there's a romantic impulse. So who read an American book back then? Really no one, because there was no real literature being written. However, there was some art, romantics, favoring the romantic period, romanticizing. And so there's a real beginning in painting, focusing on the landscape of the United States, and that is can be found from its beginnings at this Hudson River School, where they are focusing on the arts. They're focusing on the outdoors, the frontier, painting it how it is. Okay, Hudson River School, very, very big to know. One of the first American authors, his name is James Fenimore Cooper, and he wrote about his frontier experiences with the natives. And he wrote a book called The Last of the Mohicans. You also have Walt Whitman, another early American author who celebrates democracy. You also have the probably one of the more famous American novels, Moby Dick, where in your book it says the human spirit was troubled, often a self-destructive force. As you know, Captain Ahab is trying to find out and seek Moby Dick, the infamous white whale. And Southern literature, romanticizing about how great the plantation system was. Of course, the Southerners are going to focus in on what makes them great. So here's Walt Whitman and Moby Dick. So continuing on, you have some other beginnings. You have Transcendentalism, which is a movement where every person possessed an inner light that could illuminate the highest truth and put him or her in direct touch with God. Transcendentalism. Okay, and two very famous transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's going to write about self-reliance, and then another guy, Henry David Thoreau, who is a big author, and he wrote a novel called Walden, where he lived alone in nature for 2 years, and he wrote about his experience. And then he writes about civil disobedience, which is the personal morality had the first claim on his or her actions that a government which required a violation of that morality had no legitimate authority. And then there are discussions of utopian societies. Remember, utopias are trying to find the perfect society. Remember, this is also around the time where it's a little bit after the Enlightenment. It's kind of during the Industrial Revolution, if we think back to world history last year. And these people are trying to solve the problems that were created by the Industrial Revolution. So they're trying to create these perfect societies where there will be no problems. There will be no people going on strike. There will be no people going on strike for higher wages, better working conditions. They will just live in peace and harmony and sharing everything, okay? And so you have Brook Farm in Massachusetts, where residents would share in the labor and the leisure. You have New Harmony, where residents worked and lived in equality. And then you have the Oneida Society in New York, where they had free love. They sought to achieve perfection. That's utopias. So here's Emerson on the right, and here's Henry David Thoreau on the left. So we got some religions coming about. I know Transcendentalism was a movement. Unitarianism is a religion, and they believe that Jesus was not divine. And you also have Mormons and Mormonism come up, and it was founded by Joseph Smith, where they're being persecuted all across. It was Indiana, and then they went to Missouri, and Joseph Smith was murdered in jail. So the Mormons continued on their their big trek, led by Brigham Young, all the way to Utah. But Utah is not admitted as a state until much later due to its polygamy issues with Mormons. You also have the Shakers, founded by a woman named Ann Lee. They advocated celibacy and equal rights for women. And one of the things, and they were given their names because during, worship, during church, they would shake their bodies. So those are the Shakers. I believe this is Joseph Smith on the right. And here you have, I think this is a Shaker, because they would also get up and dance. Shakers, shaking and moving. Okay, the Second Great Awakening. Need to know it because it is different than the first one. Yes, it's along the same lines as the first, some religious revival, getting back to, going back to church, being closer to God, having a relationship. But the Second Great Awakening also inspired societal reforms. One of the first people to do that was Charles Grandison Finney, and he helped convert many individuals in the burned over district in upstate Western New York, and saying that all individuals could achieve salvation. Another movement is the temperance movement, and that is the push to limit hard alcohol or abstain from alcohol altogether. Yes, this is the first abolition movement. And so you have not abolition. Why can't I think of it? To abolish alcohol. It was mainly led by women. Women were often seen that they were the victims of alcoholism. Prohibition. There we go. The first prohibition. I knew it was somewhere around there. So that's the first prohibition movement. And this is in the 1840s, people. 1840s. And women were realizing that men had a problem with alcohol. Okay. They would either be abused or the men would be wasting away their family money. Maine was one of the first states to pass a dry law in 1851. Neil Dow, who was a mayor in Maine, he's one of the forefront leaders of the prohibition movement, the temperance movement altogether. Medicine and science at this time was still very primitive. and they lack knowledge of disease being its biggest obstacle. And people who contracted cholera often died from it because, they just didn't know anything. Okay, primitive treatments, right? So there you go. Remaking Society, continuing on. So education, you have a man named Horace Mann. He's decreed the father of education. He said the only way to protect democracy was to create an educated electorate, and that's along the same lines as Thomas Jefferson. He created the tax-supported elementary school system. However, schools in the South and West were inferior to those in the North. Kind of continuing on from a couple chapters ago, where educational opportunities in the South weren't as plenty as there were in the North, unless you went to military school. But that's different. Okay, you have prison and mental health reform. This is still at the time where if you were in debt to someone, you would face prison. And they were nicknamed holes in the ground. You have solitary confinement or penitentiaries, where you would focus. You'd be, put in solitary confinement, and you would be in a box by yourself, no contact, and you would, that's why they call penitentiaries penitents. Okay, you have Dorothea Dix, who's one of the leaders of mental health reform movements. And you also have women's rights. Okay, women's rights. The Seneca Falls Convention came across, where a lot of educated men and women came together to talk about the women's rights movement, women's suffrage. Okay, it's been about almost at least 50 years, almost 60 years of us as a country, and women are still not equal to men. 1848. So many women's rights advocates were also abolitionists, those against slavery. So there's going to come a time down the road where they're going to have to make a decision: women's rights or abolition of slavery. And then from this Seneca Falls Convention, there's a Declaration of Sentiments, where they mimic the Declaration of Independence and say all men and women are created equal. There's Dorothea Dix on the right, and Horace Mann is on the right. Dorothea Dix is on the left, Horace Mann's on the right. Okay, Crusade Against Slavery. So one of the first abolition societies was called the American Colonization Society, where the goal was to have owners paid for freeing their slaves and sending them back to Africa, the newly founded country of Liberia. It wasn't successful because these former slaves born in America wanted to stay in America. They just want to be free. Two abolitionists you need to know. That's why they're starred. You need to know who they are. Okay, William Lloyd Garrison, and he was a very radical abolitionist for his time. He published the newspaper The Liberator, where he argued for the immediate and uncompensated end to slavery. So we don't need to pay the slave owners, the plantation owners, money for freeing their slaves. They just need to get free now. And again, that is very radical at that time. Okay. You have David Walker, who advocated violence to end slavery. And then you have our guy, Frederick Douglass, former slave, Black abolitionist. He was a great orator and a women's rights advocate. And he's going to also, work in alongside him, side by side with William Lloyd Garrison and others to, bring about abolition and, influence the idea that slavery needs to end, and soon. So you have William Lloyd Garrison on the left. That's our young Frederick Douglass on the right. Okay. Anti-abolitionism. So abolitionists in the North were of the very small minority. Although, yes, we always assume the North was against slavery, there is that few minority who actually advocated to ending it. Yes, the Northern merchants and business owners were like, yeah, we don't like slavery. But at the same time, there were, free African Americans, former slaves, all that living in the North who were treated just as bad. So it's still the wave of, oh, the North was for abolishing slavery and the South wasn't. They were still seen as crazy, if you could, lack of a better adjective, to fully go against abolitionism. You have Elijah Lovejoy, who's martyred for being murdered in Illinois, and he was an outspoken abolitionist and editor of a newspaper. And then the abolitionist movement splits over the role of women. Do we free them, or do we grant them equal rights, even though there's this big slavery issue? And some say yes, some say no. And sadly, women, sorry, you take a back seat. There's a very famous court case, Prigg versus Pennsylvania, where it stated that northern states do not need to aid in the fugitive slave law of 1793. However, there will be a future fugitive slave law in 1850 that actually does require this. Up until that point, 1793, they didn't have to aid. They didn't have to help Southerners coming to the North trying to find their slaves. They didn't have to help. But the Compromise of 1850 changes all of that. So you have the Free Soil Party, free soil, free labor, free men. And they're also going to want to keep the expansion of slavery from happening in the new territories, especially in the North, but also in the South below that 3630 line. And they claim slavery hurt the white workers. You also have a big time novel written in this time period, Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and it showed the evils of slavery. This is a picture of the 6th Chief Justice Chase, Supreme Court Chief Justice, and we used to have a $10,000 bill. No longer, obviously, it's no longer in existence, but and this, I think, this is about from Uncle Tom's Cabin. Okay, last slide. What's not in the book, but you should know, there's a gag resolution from about 1836 to 1844. The House made a resolution that tabled, meaning they didn't allow the presentation or discussion of any bill that went against slavery. From this time, that's what, when you hear put a gag in it, they couldn't bring it up. They couldn't provide legislation to end slavery. It was eventually overturned with the help of John Quincy Adams. Yes, the former president became a House member, and through his influence, he was able to overturn it. But this kind of goes against the freedom of speech, First Amendment, because they weren't allowed to. And that seems wrong, right? I hope you see that seems wrong, because Southern states still have that majority in the House. Remember, that one's based on population numbers and slaves counted for 3/5. Remember. Okay. And then there's a guy named Amos Kendall, who was the Postmaster General under Andrew Jackson, and he's the leader of the post office, right? Postmaster General. And he did not allow any delivery of abolitionist material going south. So anything that had anything to do with getting rid of slavery could not be sent south. And this is John Quincy Adams, FYI. Okay, a lot of stuff discussed in this period. 1800, 1848. Hopefully some information has stuck. That's why I've highlighted some of the main ideas, main points in red. And, you know, get ready for that period 4 exam coming up shortly. All right. If you like that, smash that like button for me. You know, help your boy out. And as always, stay safe, wash your hands. Peace.